Hi, so this is a video about making 14th century buttonholes. And going back to some of the source material, I realized that I've been doing them wrong for years, so that's a learning experience. I had thought that you could either do a modern buttonhole stitch around them or that you could whip stitch. I don't know where I read the whip stitch thing, or if I did, or if I made it up in my head. Anyway, according to this book, which is fantastic, they're all done with buttonhole stitch. However, you don't have to be too worried about making it super pretty. They were pretty rudimentary in the 14th century. So don't panic and don't worry too much about your stitches. I wanted to show you some of mine, which now I know are all whip stitched, but even whip stitched, they have held up fine. These are done after a lot of practice. They are not too bad looking from the outside. Once they're buttoned, you really can't see the stitches. If you look at the inside, you can see they're kind of all over the place, but again, they're still functional, and a lot of the stitches on extant garments are also not great. So don't worry about getting them perfect before you start your garment. Through lots of practice, they'll just get better and better. And I was going to show these to show how close to the edge of the garment they are. So it's basically the very, very edge, and then your button is sewn onto the very edge of the other side, which means you don't have any overlap. The sides of the garment will butt up against each other like this. And the stitches are farther apart than in modern buttonholes, so you're going to see the fabric in between. Don't worry about it. It's really just enough stitching to keep the fabric from fraying. So on to some of the things that I've learned over doing them. First of all, you don't need a lot of backing. This is just 2 layers of wool. Let's say this is the outside of the garment. This is the inside. I've whip stitched this edge over, and then I do a little running stitch on the edge just to give it a little bit more stability and keep it sharper. You can't see the stitching at all from the outside, hardly. It just looks like little pinpricks in the fabric. And then the biggest secret is using a buttonhole chisel. If you try and cut the buttonholes with scissors or anything else, you end up getting a really crooked slot to work with, and then they never look great. I've done that a lot. It kind of looks like some sort of rabid animal chewed the edge of your garment. Again, they're functional. No one cares. I've gotten a lot of compliments on my rabid buttonholes, so again, don't worry too much, but this makes life 1,000 times easier. So what you do, and I'm gonna move this down, is you've got this, you put it so it's right on the edge. I usually leave about 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch. Use your best judgment, and then just push down, and you've got your buttonhole hole. You want to kind of try and go with the grain of the fabric. You don't want to cross the grain too much if you don't have to, because that'll lead to more fraying. So now you've got that. I've got thread. I'm going to use a contrasting thread since I realized on the button video that that would have been better. I lost my thread. So I'm going to use this blue thread. Needle. And now move this back down so you can see. And then I take this and put it between the layers if you can, so that the knot ends up on the inside. And then I work from the outside because that's the side that you care about looking neatest. And then you have a little bit more control over how it looks. So you start at the edge. There are no bar tacks on the end in 14th century buttonholes. So you're literally just covering the raw edge. So You do a stitch from the outside, come up through the middle of the buttonhole, wrap this thread around the edge of that, which is what makes the buttonhole stitch versus just a whip stitch, and pull it tight. And there's your first stitch. So then you do that again. And like I said, you don't go directly next to the stitch previous. They were a little bit farther apart than what we're used to with modern buttonholes. So, and you just keep doing that. I'll move this down. And I'm trying to do the buttonhole stitch. I don't have as much practice at making it look nice versus the whip stitch because that's what I've been doing. So once you get to the end of the buttonhole, I usually make sort of a, let me do one more stitch here. You stitch down underneath the buttonhole and come out on the other side. And then you just turn the fabric and go back. And this would normally be done in a matching thread to the fabric, but I did it in a contrasting one just to make it more visible. And then once you're done with the buttonhole, you go through to the back. And then I just stitched on the underside of some of the stitches just to hold it in place. And then I carry the thread, so stitch it in between the layers so you can't see the needle front or back. And then if you have the next buttonhole already cut, you'll just come out where you want to stitch for that one. And then you can keep going. And one last thing, I wanted to show how to sew on the button to go with the buttonhole. So say this is the edge of your garment. Here's your button, which again should match the fabric color. This one already still has its tail from being made, so I'm just going to use that thread to sew it onto the edge. So thread it. And then because these are sewn onto the very edge, you go through like this. And you want to leave this a little bit loose as you stitch it because you need to make the shank at the end. So I just don't pull the stitches too tight so it's a little bit loose and floppy on there. Stitch around a couple times. And once that seems pretty secure, you just wrap the thread around the bottom of the button to make the shank. And then I take the needle, go underneath the thread shank, to keep it in place. And then just like with the buttonhole, I will go in between the layers of the fabric and pop back out where I want to sew the next button, so I don't have to cut and knot the thread in between each one. So yeah, now you've got the buttonhole, there you go, and the button, and there it is. And that's all there is. So let me know if you have any questions, and